post the link, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So you guys are going to need your dynamic versus static slides. They are on the Google Classroom. I just posted them this morning. They should be under the April 13th tab. It should be right after the Ed Puzzles that I had assigned on Monday. So go ahead, and I don't know if you want to not see me and just follow along with the slides as I talk it out, or if you want to open put the two windows side by side. I know with a MacBook, all you have to do is press the little green kind of button on the upper left-hand corner next to the yellow minimizer and the X to close out. So all you got to do is hold that, drag it on one side, and then it'll let you pick the other tab for the other side. So if you wanted to go ahead and open up those, you can go ahead and do that now. I'm going to post the link to the live on our Google Classroom. Okay, so my iPad is not doing what I want it to do, so let's turn that off and put that back on. Let's go ahead and put that on the phone. The link will be up soon. Turn on. I hope you guys are all doing well. Welcome to my room. So I'm going to go ahead and post the link to the live. Let's hope it lets me post on Google Classroom through my phone. It should, but the app was closing out on me over there. Let's hope it doesn't close on me. Yes, it won't close on me. Okay, let's not use the chat right now. So if you're just joining in, make sure you guys are opening up the dynamic and the static slides, so that way you guys can follow along as I give the lecture. So I'm going to try, it's uploading on my phone right now, so let's go ahead and add the link to the stream page so that way people know. No, it's April 15th. Whoops. Okay, so let's go ahead and add this. Classrooms. Also, those of you that are in Cinder, you will have your quiz posted after I'm done with this live. Okay, it's uploading. Let's hope I do not have to use my phone for this, because that is a very small screen. It is taking its sweet time. Okay, so let's see if this will work. So just for those of you coming in, please make sure that you guys are going on to the Google Classroom and clicking on the dynamic versus static character slides, so that way you guys can follow along as we go along with it. I'm just pulling it up right now, and then we will go ahead and get started. I will try to show you kind of where I'm at with the slides. So it should look a little something like this. Okay, so you should have these slides up, because today we're going to be talking about dynamic versus static characters. And the brightness on this is not helping. So that doesn't help at all either. So when we think about dynamic versus static characters, we're going to go ahead and get started. I will pause every now and then to hold for questions. So when we think of dynamic versus static characters, this is something that you guys are actually more familiar with than you think. There are dynamic and static characters in every single show you've watched, every single film you've watched, every single novel you've read. Comic books have dynamic and static characters. Manga has dynamic and static characters. So this is a literary tool that authors use to try to show the complexity behind what our main characters think, what maybe our side characters, their purpose, their function. So on the first slide, you'll see I have two examples. What is a dynamic, one is a static. So those of you familiar with Star Wars, Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader is a dynamic character. It is a person who, as Shrek would say, has layers. So Captain Hook, on the other hand, is more of a static character, and we'll be getting into that a little bit more. So go ahead and go to the next slide. You'll see Prince Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender there. So those of you that are just joining in, the dynamic and static slides are on Google Classroom. They are on the April 13th tab. They are under dynamic and static character lecture slides. So these are already all uploaded. If you wanted to just follow along and listen as I give lecture, you are more than welcome to do so. Let me make sure that link posted. And it did. Okay, so everybody should have all of that ready to go. Let's refrain from using the chat until I am ready and open for questions that you may have. So when you think of dynamic characters, sometimes they come off, it is in your literature circle classroom. So you're only using your literature circle classroom from now on, unless you're doing Kahuna Kudos. Then you go to quarter 4 class, but you're only using your lit circle classrooms. Okay, moving on. So dynamic characters are similar to a term that us in the English profession like to call round characters, but they are not the same. And we will go through what the difference between a round character and a dynamic character is. So one big thing to know is that dynamic characters always face trials and tribulations. They always struggle throughout the novel because that struggle provides them a chance to learn from their encounters, their experiences, and allows them to change throughout the novel. So that's very important to know. So you'll already be thinking, oh, that's kind of like the main character in the novel I'm reading. Exactly. Because who wants to read a novel about a character that stays the same from the beginning to the end? We see character growth during that time. So they also learn from other characters. Okay, this is where maybe static characters may come in, but we will get into that. So Prince Zuko is a perfect example of a dynamic character, one of the best redemption stories in a series. But you'll notice if you have watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, you know that in the beginning of the show, he's an enemy of the Avatar. He is totally against, he's out to kill the Avatar. But towards the end, he grows and learns from his mistakes that he, makes throughout the series and ends up actually being a great ally to the Avatar. That's not even the whole story of what his whole journey is. But you'll notice throughout the show that he goes through many trials and tribulations that kind of bring forth this growth within him. And he learns from his mistakes. So it's very important to note that. Dynamic characters will always learn from their mistakes, and they will always go through some kind of transformation, whether it be physical or implied. Often it is more implied than it is a physical transformation. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about the differences between round characters and dynamic characters. So here we have a picture of Jay Gatsby. That is a novel you guys will be reading in your junior English class. So Jay Gatsby is a person that's considered a round character. Okay, so their traits are complex, but they're more described by an author. That is what a round character, that is the first thing. So Harry Potter can be considered a round character, okay, because his traits are often described by J.K. Rowling throughout the series. Okay, so it's more shoved in your face by the author, whereas dynamic is a bit different. So dynamic characters are not described outright. Like I said, the key word here is implied. They are more implied throughout the novel, show, TV series, movies, than it is just shoved in your face. It's kind of a hidden meaning. It's that kind of deeper meaning that I always talk about. That's how you know if it's a dynamic character. Okay, so, like I said, oh, there's Shrek. Example of a dynamic character. Shrek. Believe it or not. Okay, so here are some functions of a dynamic character. Okay, they have a coming of age experience. So those of you that are reading more novels with teenage type of characters, they do come to a coming of age where they kind of bridge from being kind of an adolescent into a more adult role. That is kind of that transformation that we're talking about. Okay, they gain maturity. They show that they have made a full transformation. Okay, that changes significantly throughout the story. So, Shrek is my example, yes. So, Shrek at the beginning of the film, you know, he's kind of that grumpy ogre. He's very not, he's quite ignorant. He just does not want anything to do with anybody. But as he goes through his journey with Donkey, he ends up changing, okay? He finds love for Fiona. He finds that he does actually have the ability to care. So once again, let's refrain from using the chat. But he does have that ability to care inside him. And then at the end of the film, I'm sure we've all seen Shrek. He ends up getting the girl and ends up being a more sympathetic character than he was at the beginning. Okay, so Shrek is actually an excellent example at what a dynamic character is, and also quite the excellent meme. Okay, so let's go on to other examples of dynamic characters, excuse me. So Neville Longbottom is an example of a dynamic character. Okay, so Neville, we know in the beginning of the novels, and even in the films, if you have watched it, he's a very shy person, isn't really willing to stand up for himself, but then you see him change throughout the novels and throughout the films. He truly comes out and starts to become himself in Order of the Phoenix when you kind of learn about his backstory a little bit more. So Neville Longbottom is an excellent example of a dynamic character. So another one is my boy Annie. Okay, we have Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader. You see him in the prequels, even though we all like to believe that the prequels don't exist. Okay, so we see Anakin Skywalker change from a child into an adult, but we also see the change from him going from the light side of the Force to the dark side of the Force. Okay, you see that full transformation. Dynamic characters aren't always positive characters. Guys, please refrain from putting stuff in the chat. Okay, you're lecturing, you are following along right now. I will open for questions right after this slide. Okay, so we all know what happens. He becomes Darth Vader. That is kind of his transformation. But even then, remember, like Shrek says, he has layers. There's a bunch of trauma and different experiences that have affected Anakin's character. Okay, another one for all of my anime lovers out there is Edward Elric. Okay, from Full Metal Alchemist. Okay, so he's a person that you not only see physical transformation throughout the series, but you also see an emotional transformation from him as well. From somebody who used to be selfish in the beginning, only cared about their quest for the Philosopher's Stone, to in the end ended up being caught in this whole plot of there was a genocide, trying to defend those who were affected by this genocide, so on and so forth. An excellent example of both a physical and emotional transformation. Okay, so I'm going to open the chat for questions right now. Is there anybody that has any questions on what a dynamic character is? Any questions whatsoever? Any questions? Does anybody have an example that they can think of that they want to put in the chat of what might be a dynamic character from any film, story, movies they've seen? Okay, Hermela, you have a question? What is your question? So Snape's story, Juliet, I find this very funny that you asked this question. So Snape's story is kind of a redemption story, but remember it was his motive the whole time to protect Harry throughout the novels, but then we end up knowing his true reasons behind it. Snape's story is extremely complex. He definitely is a dynamic character, but there would be people that would argue maybe that it isn't a redemption story because he did kind of abuse his power over Harry, but that is a great question. Okay, so Cinder Quiz will be assigned right after I'm done with this lecture, if that is your question. Is the dynamic character almost always the main character? Yes. Okay, so excellent question. So dynamic character is almost always a main character. There are some exceptions to the rule, Darth Vader being one of them, because we know in the Star Wars series, especially in episodes 4, 5, and 6, that Luke Skywalker is kind of our main character. There are such things as dynamic villains, but almost always there is a correlation between the main character and the dynamic character. So, Colin, so when I say it's more implied, it's not written in the text flat out. It means that there is kind of a hidden meaning behind the words as you see that character's transformation. So if we're talking, for example, like Harry Potter, they talk about the transformation. J.K. Rowling might say, oh, Harry learned from this because da-da-da-da-da. That does not imply that he's a dynamic character. It's kind of, you notice through his experiences that he has changed. Okay, so it's not something that the author says straight out. It's something that the reader kind of has to figure out. Okay, let's see. Totoro is kind of, so those are mainly flat characters, more because it's a good movie, or a child's movie. Okay, Draco is actually, that's kind of, it's another one that you can be argued to be a redemption story, but is it really a redemption story? That's something that's a little bit arguable. But remember, we're talking about dynamic and static characters here. Yes, you should be able to tell, and I'm going to give you guys like hints and questions as to what makes, kind of questions to ask yourself to know, is it a dynamic character or are they a static character? And there's kind of big things that help you kind of, realize. Let me see. So Kylo Ren is actually a redemption story. That's something that you see him change from side. Like he kind of goes through the Zuko journey, where he goes from the bad to the good. Chihiro from Spirited Away, she's a dynamic character because you do see kind of a transformation where in the beginning she was very selfish, very to herself, and then she ends up being such a giving character in the end. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about how to identify a dynamic character. That might help answer your questions a little bit more. Tyler Hayao Mizuyaki is the man who made Spirited Away. Not the main character, but yes, Chihiro is a dynamic character. Stargirl, she can be, I am going to try to, we'll talk about the assignment when we get there. Okay, so let's talk about static characters, okay? Let's pause the chat for a second. So let's talk about static characters. So make sure that you guys are on the slide where you have Tetsushima from Akira on it. Okay, it should look a little bit like this. I don't know how to not get the glare. Nope, that's not helping. It's probably because my window's open. That's fine. But you should have Tetsu as the photo here. So static characters is a character that okay, so these characters are interesting. Okay, they can be interesting, but oftentimes they are associated with flat characters, which we will talk about the difference between the two in just a second. So they can also be round characters too. They can also have those layers, but they typically remain the same within their motives and their attitudes towards other characters throughout the story. So, flat characters versus static characters. You're going to see you have a picture of Scar from Lion King here, so we should be on the flat characters versus static characters slide. So a flat character typically has one or two traits that make up their whole personality. Okay, so that means that's it. That's all they are. There's nothing more interesting about them. Okay, they're not complex. They're pretty one-dimensional. They're pretty much, this is how I am. This is how I will stay. Boom, that's it. Okay, so in comparison, a static character, they may not go through change like the dynamic character does, but they still remain interesting. Think of Scar, for example, from Lion King, a person who has such a motive for revenge and such a motive to get that crown, to be the king of the Sahara. But you have Scar, who is an actual interesting character. Okay, so flat, not interesting. One or two traits, nothing more to them. Static, there is a little bit more to them, but they remain the same throughout the story. Okay, so let's look at the functions of static characters. We're looking at Donkey right now. We're going back to that Shrek reference. So they often help out protagonists in the story. A static character is not always the villain. It could be seen as the sidekick. Okay, so Donkey is a great example of this. He helped Shrek throughout his journey, but Donkey pretty much stays the same within his attitudes from the beginning to the end of the film. Okay, he's still that happy-go-lucky, I'm making waffles type of person. Okay, so whereas you see Shrek go from angry, isolated, to more open and sharing, and Donkey stays the same throughout. Okay, so they are often seen as something that we call the foil. So when I say they're a foil to that character, that means they are the complete opposite. Okay, so Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, complete opposites. Mufasa, Scar, complete opposites. Shrek, Donkey, complete opposites, okay? So they may be opposites, but they also may help each other out in the end. Okay, so here are some more examples of static characters. Okay, so you see Captain Hook from Peter Pan remains a static character throughout. Okay, so you have Captain America, and I'm more so maybe talking about the comics than I am the film, but he's always, even in the films, he is always a person that kind of stands for the right thing, has the same kind of motive throughout the whole film, whereas you see other characters have maybe more of an arc and more of a dynamic change throughout the plot. Okay, so also those of you that are fans of Sherlock Holmes is considered a static character. He's still the same throughout every single tale that's told about him. He does not have enough change and transformation to be considered a dynamic character. Whereas you see Watson may be considered a dynamic character because he does change his views throughout the films and throughout the actual TV series. You see him change in some of the tales that are told. Okay, so that's an example of a hero figure that is kind of a static character throughout. Same with Captain America. So let's talk about the differences between dynamic and static characters. But before we do that, is there any questions about static characters? Just about static characters right now. I'm going to tell you guys at the end how to identify both. Is there any questions about static characters? So remember, they are the villain majority of the time, but they are not always the villain. Okay, so static characters sometimes are the villain and sometimes they're not. So they could be a side character, a sidekick. Yes, there often is more than one static character in novels. Okay, so anybody, think of it this way, anybody that is not considered a static character, dynamic character could very well be considered I'm getting myself confused. Anybody that isn't a dynamic character might be considered a static character. So Snape, this is where Snape, it's arguable whether or not he can be a static or a dynamic. Okay, so you have to think, Is there really a full transformation? Okay, I think both sides could be argued, and there could be excellent evidence from both sides to kind of prove that he can kind of fit into both categories, which is what makes his character so interesting and so complex. But he may lean a little bit more on the kind of static side. So Chihiro and the journey. But we don't know enough about the backstory of No Face to know whether or not it will fit into dynamic or static. But there's little tidbits that make it kind of fit into both. But remember, it's not a main character. So it may as well fit into we see in characters such like Chihiro, such like, I'm forgetting Spirited Away characters. But we do not see that much of a change compared. So Stargirl actually, if you think about it, she does change for a little bit. She goes back to the same person she was. She doesn't necessarily make that full transformation. The person who kind of changes the most throughout the story is Leo. Mononoke actually would be considered kind of a static. That's another one because Mononoke, whereas you might have other people. Haku would be a dynamic character. That's the name I could not remember. Okay, but you have the foil to Princess Mononoke, which is Ashitika. I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now. I have not watched Soul Eater to the fullest, so I would not be able to provide my commentary. But you are seeing how typically the opposite from some characters, so dynamic and static, are kind of that idea of their foils. They're opposites of each other. One person goes through a transformation, the other person remains the same throughout. So let's talk about their roles in the story. So we are at dynamic characters versus static characters. We're thinking about the roles now. So dynamic characters, like many of you guys have caught on, are typically the main character in the story. Not always, but typically. Okay, and then the static character, they're either the villain or possible sidekick in the story. That's another hint that you might see. So those of you that are actually reading Unwind, you might have 3 dynamic characters, or you might have 2 dynamic characters, 1 static. You kind of continue reading, and you'll see the transformation of our main characters here. But remember, there are exceptions. Not always is the villain a static character. So remember, Sherlock Holmes is a hero and he's a dynamic character. Darth Vader is a dynamic character and he's a villain. Okay, so they do kind of, authors play with this idea a little bit. So we're at the question, are they dynamic? This is how you guys are able to identify it. I found 5 questions that you can ask yourself throughout reading the novel. So 1, does the character feel differently about themselves? And this is not something you should ask yourself after the first 3 pages of your novel. You should start asking yourself this after very important plot events. Like, oh, did this event change who they are and change their thought process, their views on a certain issue or character? Okay, so do others see the characters differently? This is where you take in the static character's point of view. How do others view this character? Have their views changed from the beginning to the end of the novel? Okay, so what about the repercussions of the story's primary conflict? Okay, so think, for every action, there's a consequence. So whatever that character experiences, those consequences, has that changed them? How has the story itself changed the character as a whole? And then, has a character undergone physical transformation? They will not always go through physical transformation. One of the only ones that you kind of see go through physical transformations, if in the Harry Potter movies you see physical transformation, because they literally go from childhood into adolescence, pre-adulthood. Fullmetal Alchemist is another one where you actually do see a physical transformation. Yes, so Day and June are considered both dynamic, because think about how they've changed in their views of each other from when they first meet to when you get to the end of the novel. Like I said, this takes a whole novel or a whole kind of story to figure out who is dynamic and who is static. It's a little bit easier to figure out who is static because you'll notice that they do stay the same, whereas dynamic, it might be an event that changes them. It might be a journey that changes them. It might be a single line that another character says that changes them. There's a lot to be open to change for these dynamic characters. But with physical transformations, they do not always go through physical transformations. Your main character, Zhao, sort of goes through a physical transformation if you think about it, when he goes in disguise. Yes, you kind of sort of have to wait. Like I said, this takes a little bit to kind of have that character change because they do need to go through some things that cause them to change their minds. But if you think about Zhao, he already has had a little bit of a physical transformation when he kind of goes into that you kind of personality. That is considered a physical transformation, even though it is actually a disguise. You'll understand more when we go on with the story. So let's talk about static. So how can you identify a static character? So think about what's the character like in the beginning versus the end. Have they remained the same? Have they changed a little bit? Are their motives still the same? Excuse me. Okay, so think about what the character's ambition is. Okay, so and when it comes to villains, think about, do they still want the same thing at the end? Do they still want that crown? Do they still want to, kind of kill that person in the Hunger Games? That type of thing. Okay, think about how others react to this character. Do they have a positive outlook on this character? Is this somebody that's more of a sidekick to our main dynamic character? So on and so forth. And then, is this character's environment shaping them? That's something that you can ask yourself for both. Because especially with the Hunger Games, think about how is that environment changing Katniss throughout versus how is that environment changing Peeta throughout? Okay? If you think about the environment in Legend too, how is Day's environment influencing his decisions versus how June's environment is influencing her decisions? All of that, environment and or setting, always kind of changes. So that Peeta is for those that are reading Hunger Games. And think too, along with Cinder, how is Cinder's environment changing versus the situations they're put in, puts the effects on the characters, pushes them to make certain decisions. Okay, the static character will always kind of lean the same way, whereas the dynamic will kind of weigh both options a little bit more. So I'm opening up the chat again for any questions. Do you have any questions or any clarifications needed on dynamic versus static characters? I will go over the assignment. I will pull up that slide because you guys are going to have to map out your dynamic and static characters. Not all of them, but I do want you to pick the main dynamic characters and the main static character or characters in your novel. So let's go ahead. Any questions so far? I'm sure you guys will have. Oh my God, how do I exit out? Okay. I'm sure you guys will have questions about the actual assignment. Okay, so you will see that there is so the quiz for Cinder will be on after this live. I just have to get through this live first, and then it will work. And then flat character. If there was no characters like that, it would be probably one of the most boring films you will ever watch in the world. Because the reason why we watch films is to see those characters' growth. I'm no longer telling you guys about your characters, whether or not they're static or dynamic. I need you guys to kind of figure that out on your own. Okay, so I want you guys to kind of think about it, ask yourselves those questions. Because think about, does it happen in the beginning of the novel and the end of the novel? Maybe mentioned before, but does it happen throughout the plot of the novel? Okay, so you guys are going to be doing a dynamic. I wish there was just not a glare. You guys are going to be doing a dynamic and static slide. How do I not? This brightness keeps going up on its own. sadly, I do not know how to change that. So you guys are going to be doing a dynamic and static character, and then you guys are going to put the name of your novel here. I have directions laid out in a slide. There it goes with the brightness. So I do have it in a slide where you do kind of see where, I wish this brightness would just go down, but I do kind of map out what I want. So you guys are going to pick a dynamic character from your novel and explain what makes them dynamic. Yes, this slideshow was due on May 27th because I want you guys to have enough time to get through your novel. You're more than welcome to start it whenever you want. It's already posted. You're welcome to start it, but some people may not be able to start it until their characters go through certain things in their novels. But it's already up there for you. So you're going to pick a dynamic character. You're going to tell me why they are dynamic. You're going to pick a static character. And you're going to tell me why they're static. And then make sure you guys have an image of your character or characters, if you want to pick more than one, in your slide. I'm giving you guys the opportunity. If you want to draw it out, upload a picture, put that on your slide. You know I love seeing your artwork. If you are a digital artist and you want to do it that way, by all means, please. If you have an idea on how that character looks in your head, and if there's an actor that you think this person's going to play them, go ahead and put a picture of that actor. I want you guys to kind of let your imaginations go running with this. Those of you who already have a movie attached to your novel, you're lucky. Not every novel has a movie, but maybe you envision Katniss looking not like the lady that plays her, whose name is Jennifer Lawrence. I almost forgot her name. So make sure that you're tracking the character's progression throughout the novel. So it's important. Make sure you are answering all the questions. In the slides, I do have questions attached. And make sure you're answering and hitting each point. Your responses should be about 3 to 5 sentences. So I already have 2 slides. If you have more than one dynamic character, just make a copy of the duplicate the slide, so that way you have it there again. Okay, this is worth 30 points overall. So the questions I ask: what makes this character dynamic? How do they change and evolve throughout the novel? And I ask you to pull evidence from the text to help support your claim. Make sure you're answering with 3 to 5 complete sentences, people here. Complete sentences. Okay, and then same thing with static. What makes this character static? How are they in the beginning of the novel? How are they at the end? Pull evidence from the text to help support your claim. Once again, 3 to 5 sentences here. And then I already have a kind of thing that tells you where to insert your image. Okay, if you need to duplicate, do not delete just don't delete anything that I have in the slide. Just don't do it. Do not. Just leave the slide there. So go ahead and, yeah, that's due on May 27th. I mean, obviously there's no late dates in this whole distance learning type of thing. So yeah. So you guys can go ahead and, start working on that. If you want to make a chart, I'm trying to figure out a way to make a chart on an actual document. I might put one up later today that'll help you kind of, track the progression of your character. But if you want to use your notebook to do that and write like, oh, in chapter this happened to this character and this caused them to do this, that will help you out. I don't know you. Hold on. So your message is being, okay. Wait, what did I put twice? It might have been an accident. Oh, wait. What did I put twice? Hold on. Let me raise my iPad's right here. Did I put the slide twice? Or, well, we're going to get there. This doesn't exit out. Oh my God, I won't exit out. The assignment. It should only be up there once. Google Classroom was kind of wigging out a little bit. So you do have the lecture slides and then you have the assignment. So one of them is the slides that we went through during the lecture, and the other one is the assignment. Okay, so there should only be, it might be because I was trying to upload. Oh, I'm checking on one right now. Oh, okay, I do not know. Oh, I know why. Okay, so I will go ahead and delete one. So I'm gonna delete the one that posted at 9:01. My Google Classroom, I was trying to upload it on my laptop and then it said an error occurred, so that made me assume it did not post, so that's why I hit assign again. I will go ahead and delete that assignment. You should only have one of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that one assignment now, and there should only be one. So I have to go through all 30 classrooms to do this, so be patient, please. Okay, so there should only be one. That is my / technology mistake. Okay, do we have any other questions related to the assignment? Because I do want you guys to get started. Vocab is posted as well. Cinder, I'm posting the Okay, so I will go ahead and close out this slide. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, hit me up on Remind, and all of that. So, yeah. Oh, you're welcome, Scoops. So I'm planning on having novels being done sometime in May because that's towards the end of the year, or our school year, have that be. So it'll be done around that time. Okay, some of you guys aren't even halfway yet. So we're making it there. So once again, please make sure you guys are on top of your assignments. Make sure you're checking that daily agenda. I am noticing that many people are not checking that daily agenda, so I put it a little bit higher on your classwork page. So that way you can see what you should be doing that day and so on and so forth. So I'm gonna go ahead and close out this live. I will see you all later. Have a wonderful day. I will catch you guys on Monday. Okay? Goodbye. For the Cinder quiz, you have to be up to chapter 8. So if you have not read up to chapter 8, do not take the quiz yet. Okay, so farewell. Auf Wiedersehen. Let's end.